Gary Tomlinson, thank you for responding to the request of my exploration of what is relationship marketing to you. And I'm really asking a number of people I respect and have responded to my questions online. You wrote this great book on discovering execution, which I want to focus on more shortly after this.
Okay.
But I just want you to start with, what is relationship marketing to you?
Well, relationship marketing, from my perspective, is really thinking about execution as it happens at an individual level. To me, relationship marketing is done at an individual level. When you think about what I do for a living as far as being a coach and a consultant, I'm not trying to get 1,000 customers. I'm trying to get specific ones. So it's that relationship marketing. Now, for me, the way that I define marketing, if I was just to use a one-word term to define marketing, for me it would be attraction. And I know that for marketing to be successful, you have to have a consistent message, and you have to repeat that message often. So when I think about that, I think about I'm trying to attract clients. I'm trying to do it with a consistent message, and I'm trying to give that message to them frequently. But it's down to that individual level. I specifically think of who I would like to work with, what organizations I'd like to be associated with, and that's who I market to.
And also, knowing you over many years, one of the things I remember you did was the book reviews as a way of building relationships.
Yeah.
You're really gifted at getting to the essence of a book in a world where most of us would like to absorb more data but don't have time. And that was one of your showcases.
I still do that. And I do so, first of all, and primarily because it's a way for me to learn. When I read a book that has great wisdom, I take the time to do what you just said, write those book reports, also known as Gary's Cliff Notes. But I do that because that's how I learn. And then because it takes a pretty good amount of time, I share it with others. But what I'm doing is helping to build a brand of who I am around my business knowledge. And again, relationship marketing could often be considered, along with it, is irrigation drip marketing. Where you're just doing it over and over and over, one at a time. And you and I both have a friend, Bill Davis, that teaches about client acquisition and looking at his model that he uses. It's important knowing where you are in that cycle. You don't meet somebody and go, "Hi, my name is Gary. I would like for you to employ me, and I'd like you to pay more money than you ever thought you would pay. Are you ready for an invoice?" It doesn't work that way. Although it would.
Yeah, wonderful. And again, I'll reiterate, you led with value first. It was a win-win. You got something out of it, but you will go, how can this be a valuable asset to other people in enhancing my relationship with them? And I thought that was one of the brilliant skills, because not everyone can do Gary Cliff Notes.
Right.
But
all of us have value.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, if I could go back to my younger self, next to teaching myself about compound interest, I probably would talk about the importance of one, execution happening at an individual level, but two, you have to lead with value. It isn't about you wanting to make a sale. It's about finding someone that has a need for what you do, in a pretty quick time frame.
Absolutely. What would you say has been one of the biggest successes you've had around relationship marketing, either recently or in your career, anywhere?
I've had a number of them, but the interesting thing is they never happened quickly. And in many of the cases, it was years. But it was years before, because of what you just said. I was able to give value. I was able to show that I had something worthwhile to somebody. And I did so by not selling them. I did so by being a servant leader and providing it to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is something that what I do now, it has a lot to do with just because I've been on earth so long. And I've learned how to do it wrong over the journey. And, hopefully you get a little bit smarter as you get older.
That's very useful. What have been some of the biggest challenges you've had around relationship marketing?
Not understanding it.
Mm-hmm.
I think looking at it from the perspective of what I want. Boy,
Mm-hmm.
I need a client. I need a sale. I need this. I need that. And then I go out and start performing, executing that way. And that hadn't worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was sort of the biggest challenge. I think it was learning, understanding that especially in the role that I have as an executive coach and a business consultant, that's a trusted advisor.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm asking people to follow what I'm sharing with them. And that's a heck of a leap of faith. And so that has to, people, when they're bringing you on, are going to want to feel like they're making a right decision, and that your counsel not only is worthy, but they want to get it from you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you and I both have had someone that was selling us, and, we said, well, gosh, you did a really good job. I like what you're telling me, and I think I'd like to have that. I just don't know if I want to get it from you.
That's a great one. I love that. What do you wish you knew when you started, or what would you say your biggest tip is for someone really wanting to up their game of relationship marketing?
I think probably the biggest tip I would have is have something of value
mm-hmm.
that your marketplace needs. Mm-hmm. 2, be willing to be a servant leader in that what you're offering is actually going to help them be better at their job, maybe better in their life. I found that when you're doing that, money comes with it.
Excellent. Would you also define your version of servant leadership? Because that's a big word, and we all have different experiences of it. I think that's important.
Well, when I think of leadership, especially now, I look at leadership through the lens of execution. Mm-hmm. And that really is around servant leadership. For example, let's say I'm a senior manager and I have 10 direct reports that report to me. My job is to help each of those 10 people be the best version of themselves they can be. Mm-hmm. In fact, I got something when I'm on stage and I share this. You can just see the executives in the audience sort of looking up and pondering and maybe even grinning, because I'll say that I believe if managers took 80% of their time doing nothing else but helping the people report to them be successful, be the best version of themselves they can be, that what you would achieve collectively is far greater than what you're doing now. Mm-hmm. But most managers, I don't even know if they spend 2 to 3% of their time helping others that report to them be successful. Mm-hmm. Did that make sense?
I was saying? Absolutely. That was really very clear, very useful. One more thing I've noticed in relationship marketing is how it disrupts the sense of being alone. And before we got on, you talked about when you were an executive, the isolation you felt. And I'd love to talk about that, and then moving from that into being self-employed, and how relationship marketing can disrupt that, because it hits on a core human experience of isolation as being painful for us many times.
I have to say, in my position as founder, president / CEO of companies, that's a lonely position.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until 19 years ago that I hung out my shingle for being a coach consultant, where now I was working by myself. That's probably the loneliest I've been. As I've been an entrepreneur and business owner for my whole career. The best way for me to get a job, and sometimes I thought the only way I could get a job was to start the company. Mm-hmm. And when the company started maturing, we had, hundreds of employees. Well, although I don't miss the payroll, I sure miss the resources that those wonderful people brought to both our company and to me. Well, 19 years ago, I hung out my shingle to be an executive coach and a consultant. Now I'm a soloist. Mm-hmm. And now I'm by myself. Going back to feeling that isolation when I was the founder and president of an organization, at that level, there's just some things that you often don't feel like you can share with your organization because they may not want to hear that bad news. Mm-hmm. But here's something I found, and it was a great lesson. The more I allowed my weaknesses to show, the less they impact the group. Another way to say it, the more I allowed my fears to show and sharing it, the more that others came around and said, Gary, I hear you, but we got your back. We'll figure this out together. And so that was a heck of a learning experience for me. As a soloist, it was going around and surrounding myself with people like you, Martin, and others from the groups that you and I go to that are just sort of like mentors or peers or support groups. And then in the relationship marketing aspect, when you're doing that, you're actually starting to develop relationships with these people that you would hope to work for, work with. Mm-hmm. And that, for me, makes me feel less alone.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question or if that's
it does. And the other point you had made was just the fact going from being an executive, there was a certain level of isolation being an executive that you and I know, coaching them and working with them, that not everyone realizes because it's not safe for them from their perspective to be vulnerable. And that created a certain level of isolation. And then moving independent, it created even more.
Right. And, looking at it from the standpoint, I had an IT director in my organizations. So if I had a tech problem with my computer, which I seem to always have, I just said, hey, and called them up and they would come fix it or teach me how to use it. Now, when you're on your own, I can spend 6 hours doing something that took them 5 minutes to do. And I'm still not sure how I got it fixed, but I don't remember how.
Now you have that, which is a disruption. Yeah. Excellent. One more question I want to ask is, you have this excellent consulting and book on discovering execution. I'd love for you to share a little bit of how does discovering execution and the insights of getting things done in a corporation relate to relationship marketing.
Okay. Everything that we do takes execution. It takes execution to put a strategy together. It takes execution to communicate that strategy. It takes execution to get others to buy in, so on and so forth. Everything we do takes execution. But here's a good question. If everything we do does take execution, then why don't we really spend much of our time on trying to get better at it? Mm-hmm. Why didn't every executive have this as the number one skill they want their organization to excel at? And frankly, when are we going to discover execution? Mm-hmm. The most amazing thing about discovering execution is that you have to discover it at all. How can we discover something that everybody already knows everything about? Yeah. Well, what I mean by discovering execution, it's just transforming a vague notion of execution as a good skill to have, and realizing how critical and radical mastering execution can be to both individuals and organizations in terms of what they can and do accomplish. And from there, until you do discover execution, there's nothing to manage. Right. Now we manage lots of things. Right. But the most important aspect of any business is to manage the execution, the right execution. Mm-hmm. And that gets into servant leadership of helping people understand how it all fits together, their role in this, and then what are the critical steps they need to do to achieve and be successful in that role. Mm-hmm. Because most human beings, they want to do a good job, mm-hmm. but they're so left out on their own mm-hmm. That they don't, that they don't always achieve what they were hoping to. And excellent. I think that is the role of the organizational leaders. Yeah. To do so. And then getting back into relationship marketing, understanding that. Taking that, my marketing is again done at an individual level. And two, I'm trying to offer value to those people that helps them be the best version of themselves they can be.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes a relationship, because regardless, like I said before, regardless of how great this knowledge or wisdom is, until somebody decides they want to get it from you, it'll fall on deaf ears.
Right. Well, thanks, Gary. Thanks for taking a moment in exploring relationship marketing with execution. And how can they learn more about you?
You can go to my website, www.Gary, E as in Edward, Tomlinson.com, Gary, E as in Edward, Tomlinson.com, or just send me an email at Gary@GaryETomlinson.com.
And of course, your book on Amazon too.
That book is on Amazon, and then I don't know if you're going to just record it or just call Martin and ask him for my number. Right. But it's Discovering Execution, the Keys to High Performance Organizations. You can find it on Amazon too. So I want to just put that in there to make sure they'll look at it. Hey, there it is. Yes. Shameless plug here.
Yes, that's what I asked for. Absolutely. Excellent. After you giving value, just what we talked about.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Gary.
And with all modesty aside, it is a wonderful business book on a subject that is so rare in our business organizations.
Yes, and we've all benefited from reading your book. So great. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin.